it's amazing to me that these people, in the name of political pragmatism, want us to gloss over and ignore rampant pedophilia in our society. And I'm going to prove in this episode that this is a rampant and ongoing problem with these elite pedophile rings. And if a person is so reprobate that they will sexually assault a child, they are going to be involved in other criminal acts and other treasonous acts subverting our liberty. So the Jeffrey Epstein case matters. It will continue to matter until these individuals are sitting in prison.
The Karamo Report, pursuing the truth, dissolving the complexities of religion, culture, and politics.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Karamo Report. This week's episode is going to be slightly different, and it's going to be more of a documentary-style episode. Why? Well, there's a lot of discussion in the media regarding Jeffrey Epstein and whether or not we should move on from this case because Jeffrey Epstein is dead and you can't prosecute a dead pedophile. Well, yes, he may be not around anymore. There's lots of debate of whether he committed suicide, which I don't believe for a second. I believe he was murdered. And there's some even claiming that he's hiding in witness protection. But the reality is that our government lies to us so much. It's very plausible for citizens to have these various theories as to what we think is true. I personally believe that he was murdered. But the reality is that this is much bigger than Jeffrey Epstein. As we know, Jeffrey Epstein was charged with sex trafficking and operating a sex trafficking network. So he clearly had clients and other people that he was involved with to operate these sex trafficking rings. As we know, Ghislaine Maxwell, his female companion, was charged and is currently in prison because of her involvement in this sex trafficking operation. So if she was convicted with, helping to facilitate this sex trafficking operation, who was she trafficking the girls to? And this is the problem when people act as though we should move on. Here are two problems. Number one, as I'm going to show throughout this episode, I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail about Jeffrey Epstein per se, though we will cover it. But what we're going to discuss in this episode is a pattern that we see within our nation of these elite pedophile rings and the people getting away with it. And the problem is that this line of thinking of, well, Jeffrey Epstein is dead and we need to just move on. Number one, those individuals that him and Ghislaine Maxwell were trafficking these women and girls to are still alive. Now, do you think that these pedophiles that they were providing these children to just suddenly had to change their heart and don't like to molest kids anymore? No. So they're currently out offending children. And then additionally, what type of society are we that we're going to tolerate pedophile rings? We are a society that is reprobate, disgusting, and asking for God's judgment. As we can clearly see, not just through scripture, you don't have to be a Christian to see common sense that as adults, we have an obligation to protect the children of our society. And it's amazing to me that these people, in the name of political pragmatism, want us to gloss over and ignore rampant pedophilia in our society. And I'm going to prove in this episode that this is a rampant and ongoing problem with these elite pedophile rings. Because what people need to understand, there's multiple things going on. It isn't just a matter of these individuals who enjoy sexually abusing, killing, and harming children. But there's also the blackmail component to these operations where individuals who are in positions of power and leadership within our society are being blackmailed via these operations, which mean when you have a government official who's a closet pedophile sitting on committees in the state's houses, on the federal level, they're making decisions based on those who control them by either blackmailing them with those images, or also providing them the children for them to abuse. So now we have these reprobate people in government. And if a person is so reprobate that they will sexually assault a child, they are going to be involved in other criminal acts and other treasonous acts subverting our liberty. So the Jeffrey Epstein case matters. It will continue to matter until these individuals are sitting in prison. Because as I said before, those children deserve justice. And are you stupid enough to believe that these pedophiles have had a change of heart, that Epstein and Maxwell were servicing, that they had a change of heart and they're just not abusing children anymore. By these derelicts, these demons walking around, that means that the children of America and children of the world are in danger of becoming their next victim. Now, if you claim to be a Christian, I'm going to cite a few scriptures for you regarding why protecting the children matters so much, because you have some professed Christians acting like we should just move on. So if you claim to be a Christian, then the Bible, you should believe the Bible is the inerrant, infallible word of God. But let's just turn to the word of God real quick regarding the importance of protecting children. Psalms 82, 3-4. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Matthew 18:6. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it will be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. Psalm 112:3. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Ephesians 5:11. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. Pause right there. God is telling us to expose them. Now he's separating them. You don't take part in it, but you also expose it. So for these demonic people, because you're just, in my opinion, you're just as wicked as the pedophiles. Because if you look in scripture, you read Romans 1, it's not just those who committed the sin, but it was those who approved of them. And when you know that there are these pedophiles in our society, kidnapping, raping, killing children, and you act as though we should just kind of move on, you are complicit in the crime. You want to challenge the word of God? Because that's what I'm citing. Read Ezekiel 9. And I've cited Ezekiel 9 on the show many times. In Ezekiel 9, it talks about how when Israel faced judgment, it wasn't just the people who participated in the wickedness, going after false gods, building up the Asherahs and the high places. It wasn't just the people who participated, but it was those who were silent about the wickedness who also faced God's judgment. I digress. Moving on, Proverbs 24:11-12, which I cited often on the show. Rescue those who are being taken away to death. Hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, behold, we did not know this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? And we can go on through other scriptures talking about uneven scales, because there's another element to this story as well. Because if John Q. Public from any town USA was involved in a sex trafficking ring, they would be under the jail. But you have these people who act as though, well, certain people, because they control certain pillars of our society, if we throw those people in jail and expose these sex trafficking rings, then it could cause an international incident. It could cause this element of our society to collapse. I don't care. Because if you're raping kids, then that pillar that you control needs to be knocked the heck down anyway. Because this is corrupt. If you will participate in, if you will protect child sex abuse, if a person is participating in the abuse, then everything else that flows out of that person is corrupt. So they need to be removed. I apologize for the passion, but my goodness, I'm just so disgusted that this even needs to be said. Leviticus 19:15, Micah 6:8. The scriptures go on. God detests uneven scales. We cannot have society in America where if you're rich and powerful, well, we got to kind of dance around and see if it's a good idea to throw you in jail or not. But if a person is poor, we throw them in jail. Throw them all in jail. Throw them all in jail. If anybody involved, and I don't think it needs to be said, but clearly for those in the back of the room who can't hear, yes, we want to see who it was Jeffrey Epstein involved with. And I don't care if it's a prime minister of foreign nations, they need to be called out. Anyway, if we as a society will tolerate child sex abuse, we are reprobate and we are deserving God's justice. If you read the Bible and you read the Old Testament, there is only so much God is going to put up with. At some point, we as America is going to face the music for our child sex abuse that we tolerate as a country and for the abortion we tolerate as a country. Now, the other part is the another big issue is this is the pattern, right? So oftentimes when we look at these, what we call conspiracies, and people oftentimes want to make it sound like Jeffrey Epstein or some of these other individuals I discussed were just, this was a one-off. This was just this person committing these crimes. When you are looking for a conspiracy, you see a pattern of evidence, you see a pattern of behavior that lets you know that this is going on at a mass scale. And oftentimes we talk about conspiracies, a lot of people struggle with accepting it because it seems too crazy and they just don't want to see it. But when you start seeing a pattern of evidence, then it's like you have to open your eyes. Now, we all know that you're always going to have criminals. I don't care how wonderful we try or succeed at making our nation. We're always going to have criminals. You're always going to have terrible people. But just for the sake of argument, let's define conspiracy because, there's these individuals who want to demonize folks, the conspiracy theorists and all these conspiracy theorists. A conspiracy is defined as a secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful. There's tons of conspiracies going on. That is actually a charge that someone can be charged with, a charge to commit a conspiracy. So for us to act as though people who are incredibly powerful would be involved in conspiracy is ridiculous. Now, as we go through this episode, I'm going to show you that there is a pattern of elite child sex abuse rings happening in our country and these people getting away with it. Now, some of these rings make headlines because of a murder or is involved famous or powerful people that are allegedly connected to the sex abuse ring. And also, I think it's something else to remember as those who claim, well, we need to kind of move on and focus on the economy. And I've already made the case why that's ridiculous. But there's also the human element that many of these people who are victims of child sex abuse, they don't just move on with their lives. A story I'll share with you very quickly. This was maybe 2018, 2019. It might have been 2018. I was at a Christian conference. And the conference we were talking about homosexuality in this particular breakout session that I was in. And I was talking to one of the people in the session with me. And this gentleman, he was like in his late 70s, early 80s. And he was saying how he had to repent for hating homosexuals. And he said he just really hated gay men. And he said the reason why it happened, he hated gay men so much is because he was sexually abused as a child. He was telling me that it was a man in his community who had an airplane, which obviously this is a very wealthy person because this man, as I mentioned, he was in his late 70s, early 80s, and this was like 2017. So this time he was talking about this man showing him his airplane had to be, I would say, roughly in the early 1950s. So, having a private plane is expensive now, but at that time you had to have a lot of cash to have a private plane. So the man from his community invited him to look at the private plane. He was really excited to see it because he's a little boy, of course a kid is excited to see a plane. Well, nevertheless, when he went to go and hang out at the plane, inside the plane with the man sexually assaulted him. And so as the man's telling me this story, he is crying. He is crying hard. Now, just think about this. This is a man in his late 70s, early 80s, a Christian, because he was telling me, too, how he had to repent for hating homosexuals because it was just that person, but he was crying about this abuse. So this is something that happened over 60 years ago. And this man is still in complete tears. He got married, got married, had children, grandchildren. His family was at the conference. This man is just sobbing. Why am I sharing this with you? These victims carry these scars for the rest of their lives. For the rest of their lives. Now, this man was able to some extent move on with his life. He gave his life to Christ, got married, had children, has grandchildren. I don't know if he's still alive, of course. But many of these victims of child sex abuse, they're not so fortunate. Many of them get addicted to drugs, as later on we get into the Lincoln, Nebraska case. But some of these people become all kind of heavy drug addicts, and some of them become abusers themselves. Now, of course, once you begin to offend someone else, you're no longer a victim. But what happens is in many of these child sex abuse rings, so they'll get a kid who's, say, maybe 12 years old. And so they'll abuse this child for a certain amount of time. But then when the child gets too old, quote unquote, for them, Then they start to use this person where they were abusing him started at 12. But by the time that this kid is now 16, he's too old for them. So then they'll use that kid to go and recruit others. Jeffrey Epstein did the same thing. He would recruit these girls, sexually abuse them, then go send them out to go bring in some more girls for him to abuse once they got too old. So as I mentioned, this is important for many reasons. Number one, we cannot tolerate child sex abuse. The victims deserve justice. The criminals are able to reoffend. You have the blackmail component, and we as a society are inviting God's judgment. Now, one of the things I want to look at too, when we discuss why this matters, is you have to ask yourself, when you look at these different cases, where are they getting the kids from? Now, when you look at these cases of child sex abuse, oftentimes they look for poor children. They look for kids who will either come from single parent homes. We'll get into that in a little bit. They look for kids who may be a little bit troubled. They find those types of children. And then they offer help to desperate families. And then in the process, they're just recruiting their kids to be abused. But also in our country, there is the issue of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids who've come across the border illegally, just missing. So God only knows what is happening to these children. Now, I did go visit the border once in 2022. I went to go visit the border. And when I went to go visit the border, we were told about how these children are across the border and then given to traffickers. Please show clip 1. So there is a Congressman, Michael Cloud, who upon receiving a DHS memo, learned there are 300,000 missing children. 300,000. And with these missing children, nobody knows where they're going. And oftentimes you'll see in a moment, if you could play clip 2, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Japal, and distinguished members of the committee. It is an honor to be here. I thank you for the invitation. Confess, I knew nothing about their suffering until 2021, when I volunteered to help the Biden administration with the crisis at the southern border. As part of Operation Artemis, I was deployed to the Pomona Fairplex Emergency Intake Site in California to help HHS, Office of Refugee Resettlement, reunite children with sponsors in the United States. I thought I was going to help place children in loving homes. Instead, I discovered that children are being trafficked through a sophisticated network that begins with recruiting in home country, smuggling to the US border, and ends when ORR delivers a child to a sponsor. Some sponsors are criminals and traffickers and members of transnational criminal organizations. Some sponsors view children as commodities and assets to be used for earning income. This is why we are witnessing an explosion of labor trafficking. Now, whether it's intentional or not, it could be argued that the United States government has become the middleman in a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar child trafficking operation that is run by bad actors seeking to profit off of the lives of children. I saw vulnerable indigenous children from Guatemala who speak Mayan dialects and cannot speak Spanish. That means they cannot ask for help in English. They cannot ask for help in Spanish. They become captives of their sponsors. I have sat with case managers as they've cried to tell me the horror of what has happened to children as they make the journey to this country. I saw apartment buildings where 20, 30, and 40 unaccompanied minors have been released. I saw sponsors trying to simultaneously sponsor children from multiple ORR sites at one time. I saw sponsors using multiple addresses to obtain sponsorships of children. And I saw numerous cases of children in debt bondage, and the child knew they had to stay with the sponsor until the debt was paid. Realizing that we were not offering the children the American dream, but instead putting them in modern-day slavery with wicked overlords, was a terrible revelation.
So I want you to think about that for a minute. That you have hundreds of thousands of children coming across our southern border illegally and disappearing. And the one she knows about are being put in homes with these people who are abusing and exploiting them. And we're supposed to just move on. Okay. Got that. Nevertheless, let's look at a history of these child sex abuse rings. And I'm starting in the 1970s because that's what I'm familiar with. And looking at this pattern we see in our nation of these elite pedophile rings and the people just getting away with it. So, as you guys know, I'm from Michigan. Specifically, I'm from Oakland County, Michigan. And in the 1970s, before my time, there was this horrible situation regarding the Oakland County child killer, where there were 4 confirmed victims. There are some other suspected victims, where between February 1976 and March 1977, 4 children were kidnapped and killed. And these were all prepubescent children. And 2 of the victims, only the 2 boys, had been sexually assaulted. And these kids were kidnapped, some of them in broad daylight, right at the Woodward Corridor in Oakland County. Now, if you know anything about the Woodward Corridor in Ferndale in Oakland County, that's a very busy area for some kids and to get snatched up in broad daylight. But some of the kids were also kidnapped from Berkeley and also Birmingham. Now, the point being is that, clip 4, please. The 4 children, during the course of this investigation into the deaths of these 4 children, the police discover a child sex abuse ring based out of North Fox Island. Clip 5. So what's interesting about this case is that from my investigation, that starting in the 1970s, child sex abuse films, and I'm wording it that way because of the way YouTube will flag you, because they are trying to flag individuals who actually circulated this type of footage. But these child sex abuse videos, they had become an issue in the 1970s. And what's really interesting is that, I remember my mother telling me that in the 70s, people hadn't even heard of this, people sexually abusing children. Now, it's not that it was completely ignorant, but the average person, that was just not even on their mind. And so many of these films depicting child sex abuse were being imported from the Netherlands. So, you got Amsterdam there. But eventually this man, Francis Sheldon, began basing his global operation out of Michigan. Now, this is a pattern you see with these elite child sex abuse rings. Well, Francis Sheldon was from a very prominent Michigan family. His grandfather was the 20th governor of Michigan. He was Secretary of War under President McKinley and served in other functions. He also was a U.S. senator. Now, that's not to indict his other family members, but that's just to give you an idea of the prominent family he was from. His family was responsible for largely developing Grosse Pointe. Now, put your mind in and put yourself in the position of people in the 1970s. Now, Francis Sheldon starts an organization called Brother Paul's Mission. And what he did, he was on the board for Cranbrook. So for many of you that may be foreign, but especially from Oakland County or from Michigan, Cranbrook is a very prominent boarding school. And they have a really lovely museum. Francis Sheldon was a board member for Cranbrook. So, when the interviews you watch from people who knew him, he did a really good job of ingratiating himself within the community to be like a community leader, a community activist. So people really had no reason not to trust him, because you hear some of these other child sex abuse cases where it's just kind of like, well, these people are idiots. How did they not see what's going on? Not in the case with Francis Sheldon. People in the 70s had no reason not to believe that this man was on the up and up. They just really didn't. And so he had a partner in crime who was a gym teacher out of a gym teacher from the Port Huron area that helped him with his Brother Paul's Children mission. He also received tax dollars for his organization, because his organization he claimed to help destitute children. So again, why would anyone believe he was lying? So he had this gym teacher, Gerald Richards, who assisted him, clip 6. So Gerald Richards assisted him with his organization. These guys were in the newspaper. Gerald Richards was performing magic shows. People really trusted him, clip 7. Then after one of the victims came forward, it came out what him and Sheldon were doing when they were taking these kids to North Fox Island. Now, Francis Sheldon actually wind up escaping to the Netherlands. So I want you to listen to the stories of a couple of these boys because one of the things, and I'm maybe trying to tie it together a little better for the audience, but what happened is that during the course of the investigation into the Oakland County child killer, that's when North Fox Island started to come up, and authorities began to be aware of what was going on in North Fox Island. And Francis Sheldon was also tied into some other pedophile rings in Cass Corridor. And so for your reference, Cass Corridor in the 70s was like Times Square in the 70s, just to give you an idea. Clip 8.
And I remember seeing cameras, but me and the other boys were all naked. That's just the way, that's what you did. That's what you did. If you want to be on the island, that's what you have to do. You have to be naked. So we were all naked.
But Mr. Richards made it as, oh, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to know. Nobody's going to see it. It's okay. Come on, look, I'm doing it. So let's do it. So that's what we did. Come on, guys, bury me in the sand. So burying him in the sand, and and everybody's naked, running around, but it's okay because there's no girls around. That's the way they presented it. Don't worry, guys, there's no girls. Nobody will see you. You're watching. So Mr. Richards takes all his clothes off, jumps in the water, swims around. Come on, you guys, it's all right, and whatever. Well, okay, so we all take our swim stuff off, whatever. We jump in, and we're all running around naked. Well, hindsight now, looking at it, well, that's pretty wrong. I mean, really off key to be doing anything like that. But they made it so that it was not he, because Frank wasn't there. I don't know if he was up filming us or what he was doing. Then they came back, and they were happy, but the two boys were different after they were quiet.
I don't know if it's the exact same time, but I remember hearing one of the kids screaming and crying, like somebody was hurting him. And he was screaming and yelling, stop. And we didn't know what was going on, and we knew it was coming from a locked door. There's nothing we could do except for take off running.
So the thing about it is when you look more into this Oakland County child killer case in North Fox Island, when Sheldon first purchased the island, it was like a big story in the local news. This wonderful man bought this island for him, and he would invite lots of people to his island. So, and he was, when Richards was arrested, he blew the whistle on Sheldon. Sheldon was tipped off and fled the country. But Richards detailed a very extensive network of individuals coming to the island to abuse children, and that him and Sheldon were operating this massive ring to capture these children and record abusing them and shipping them off to people. Now, the police claim that there was no connection to North Fox Island and Sheldon and the Oakland County child killer case, but it came up during the investigation. It's also interesting is that from all reports, the FBI never went to North Fox Island to conduct any investigation. Sheldon just ran to the Netherlands to hide out until he died. Now, as the case continued into the Oakland County child killer case, a name Christopher Bush came up as a primary suspect. His father, H. Lee Bush, was a prominent General Motors executive. And so, he already had been caught, Christopher Bush, him and an associate, sexually abusing children. He got in trouble, for lack of a better word, for the first time he sexually abused children, got out, and shortly after Christopher Bush got out of jail, the fourth child in the Oakland County child killer case was murdered. So then police began investigating him. And I'm going to show you this clip right here, clip 9.
1 month before 11-year-old Timothy King was abducted from Birmingham in 1977, the Michigan State Police were giving this man a lie detector test. King was the last of the 4 known victims of the Oakland County child killer. The first victim was Mark Stebbins, abducted from Ferndale. During the polygraph examination, detectives asked Christopher Brian Bush if he'd had anything to do with the Stebbins kidnapping and murder. The trooper administering the polygraph concluded that Bush was being truthful, and even though he was facing charges in other molestation cases, he was let go.
We got a 4-time charged pedophile who's put back on the street, and if he was involved, he should have been in jail, and he shouldn't have been out the night Timmy was abducted.
Barry King is Timmy King's father. He says the newly released search warrant affidavit shows that 3 polygraph experts in 2008 took another look at the Bush lie detector test results and determined that he wasn't being truthful.
It finally confirms what we've been told by people, that 3 experienced polygraphers looked at this rookie's polygraph results and contradicted his conclusions.
So what's really interesting about Christopher Bush's suicide, keep in mind his father was a prominent executive with General Motors. When the investigators came to the home, there were a lot of suspicious signs that did not point to a suicide. Christopher Bush did not even have gunpowder residue on his hands. And the blood splatter was not consistent with a suicide in the way he was wrapped up. Unless you can wrap yourself up post-mortem, you didn't commit suicide. So there were a lot of clues that clearly point to the fact that he was murdered. But again, we see how these cases go when you have powerful people connected to child pedophile rings. Sheldon skips the country. Christopher Bush, whose father is a prominent GM executive, he quote unquote commits suicide. And then the task force that was looking into the Oakland County child killer case after Christopher Bush's death, just boom, it just went away. And so many people across Michigan don't even know about this case. And we're talking about thousands and thousands of children were flown up to that island, sexually assaulted by Sheldon and his friends. And again, this is the problem, similar to Jeffrey Epstein. You can say, oh, well, Sheldon, he fled the country and Richards went to prison. But all of the people who were involved in their pedophile network, they got away with it. Next, we'll move on to the Nebraska Boys Town case. This one is a really, it's so disgusting, and it appears to be very similar to the Jeffrey Epstein case, where there was blackmail involved with this elite pedophile ring. So you had this case in Nebraska where a man named Larry King Jr., who was prominent within the Republican Party, he was an activist, he was chairman of the Nebraska Black Republican Council, finance chair of the National Black Republican Council, which was affiliated with the RNC. He was also on the advisory committee for Ronald Reagan's second inauguration. He sung the national anthem at the 1984 Republican Convention. King owned several bars and restaurants in Nebraska, and he was the manager and treasurer of the Franklin Community Credit Union. And he was, again, like Sheldon, was viewed as a pillar in the community. So why wouldn't people trust him? Now, King was under investigation for financial crimes, where he eventually served 15 years in prison for. But then the explosion came when there were allegations that King facilitated a child sex abuse ring for prominent figures, both statewide and nationally. And we're going to look into that, but very quickly, what made this case even worse, and as you look through time, these cases of these pedophile rings, they get progressively worse. Now, I would argue part of it is the more our society has become sexually depraved, you have more sexually depraved people. But if each ring gets away with it, then the ring grows and more people just feel comfortable sexually abusing children. When the allegations came out that King Jr. was facilitating the child sex abuse ring, there was a task force created with the state legislator in Nebraska. Now, they received evidence from the Nebraska Foster Care Review Board. That submitted reports of lawmakers alleging that King procured children from the foster care system for sex parties with prominent political and business leaders. Now, this is the Foster Care Review Board saying this. Allegations were that these children were flown across America, auctioned off as slaves for elites to give them drugs and make them perform sex acts. Multiple young people came forward claiming horrid tales of sex abuse involving satanic rituals also. The Nebraska's legislator created the Franklin Committee to investigate these allegations, and they hire a private investigator, Gary Cardori. And what's interesting is that the investigators, they didn't turn to the local police. They went and got a private investigator. That just shows you, sidebar, how there's compartmentalized corruption rampant in our police forces. That's one of the reasons why I'm against qualified immunity, but I digress. Just like any criminal enterprise, you're going to have corrupt police officers involved. And in 1990, when Gary Cardari, he went to retrieve evidence corroborating the claims of the child sex abuse in the form of photos and other hard proofs that this child sex abuse ring was happening, that Larry King Jr. was facilitating, not to be confused with the guy from the news. But nevertheless, the guy died in an airplane crash with his young son in the plane with him. And now what's real suspicious is that this airplane broke midair. The airplane just broke apart midair, and he died in the crash. And then the evidence that he said he had just magically disappeared. And then within 24 hours of Caradori plane crash, the FBI impounded all of the records of the investigation. And then witnesses were threatened and harassed, and then you can see what happened. Now, former Republican state legislator John DeCamp made it a life mission to expose not only the alleged pedophile ring that involved also Boys Town, which is an organization still in existence today, a respected entity to help wayward youth, but it also was the cover-up. And one of the victims claimed that Larry King threw sex parties where children were drugged and assaulted in Washington, D.C. Larry King Jr.'s home was on Embassy Row, where international diplomats had their residences and offices. Sounds very much like the Jeffrey Epstein blackmail operation, where King had a residence in Embassy Row, and it opened the opportunity for these prominent officials to come to his house for sex parties to abuse children, therefore subsequently being blackmailed. So please play clip 10.
A Republican from the Midwest, Lawrence E. King, is serving a 15-year prison sentence for a multi-million-dollar fraud. But financial crime is only half the story. This is the true story of Lawrence King. It is the story of an evil at the heart of America, of a cover-up at the highest level. One man is attempting to uncover the full story. John DeCamp is among the most highly decorated Vietnam veterans. A former Republican state senator in Lincoln, Nebraska, he is now a lawyer fighting the legacy of Lawrence King's evil network.
It's a web of intrigue that starts in our Holy of Holies, Boys Town, Nebraska, one of the most respected institutions in the United States, and spreads out like a spider web to Washington, D.C., right up to the steps of the nation's capital, the steps of the White House, involves some of the most respected and powerful and richest businessmen in this United States of America. And the centerpiece of the entire web is the use of children for sex and drug dealing and drug couriers, the compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, but worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government that have the duty and responsibility to make sure these things never happen.
But the money trail led quickly to the original allegations of child abuse, and almost immediately anonymous threats began.
I received a phone call on the floor of the legislature. The caller did not identify himself, but he said, "Lauren, you do not want to have an investigation of the Franklin Federal Credit Union." And I asked who I was speaking to, and they said, "That doesn't matter, but you shouldn't have that investigation." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "It will reach to the highest levels of the Republican Party, and we're both good Republicans."
The night before we testified before the legislative committee, I did receive a phone call at home that said, "If you speak, you won't live to regret it."
They were telling us about prominent people in Omaha and elsewhere that were abusing children at parties.
The prominent citizens' names that originally came up were of concern to me because I knew many of those individuals, and I very frankly was shocked to have those names show up on the list. Boys Town came up frequently during the investigation, but we found it very difficult to get information about Boys Town. I was not able to find any information on my visit there, and Mr. Caradori could not get information either.
4 years on, Boys Town remains unwilling to discuss its involvement with Larry King. We asked for an interview with Chief Executive Father Val Peter, but Boys Town's public affairs officer refused.
I would have to give you a flat no. I'm just going to tell you at this point that we will not participate with you. We have no interest in talking to you folks. It's something that we don't even care to delve into.
By the spring of 1989, so serious were the child abuse allegations before the Franklin Committee that its chairman, Lawrence Schmidt, sought the advice of his lawyer, John DeCamp. He told Schmidt to turn over all the evidence to the FBI. Immediately, the videotaped testimony was leaked to a hostile media.
The media immediately started discrediting the witnesses. They were, the witnesses came across in the media, in the Omaha World Herald, especially, as the criminals.
The last 3 victim witnesses were demolished by the press, particularly the Omaha World Herald. The paper never looked for information that would support any of the allegations. The whole purpose of the stories was to destroy any credibility that these youth may have.
I've heard that people said that Gary Caradori coached me and that he told me what to say, but the fact was I didn't meet Gary Caradori until way after I'd already talked to the Omaha police about the abuse and had named all the same people. And they didn't ask me very much about Larry King or even Alan Bear at all. They treated the allegations that I made about the people who abused me almost like a joke.
I was very disappointed with the way the FBI and law enforcement treated the victims. They, in fact, turned them into the offenders, so to speak. And instead of taking the evidence that was delivered to them by the victims and interrogating the persons whom the victims identified, they seemed to bear down and try to get the victims to change their story.
The FBI's attitude was, just no, these kind of things don't happen. From the first interview when I went, and realized they don't believe a fucking thing I'm saying, they were just appalled. But I realized what that look in their eye was back then. It was fear. It was fear of every, I had witnessed, firsthand things that would, destroy this city, people, a position, what I mean? It's not going to be believed, they said. It will not be believed. You will be found guilty of perjury, and they weren't telling me maybe. They were saying, there's no way. You go on with this story, you're going to jail. That was said to me direct. Just out of fear, I came to recant the story out of fear.
Craig Spence's dad, he committed suicide. He had advanced stages of AIDS. He was an AIDS carrier and he killed himself. This was the thing that always bothered me. They claimed it was the largest male prostitution ring in the city that they've ever had uncovered. It was $1 million a year minimum.
Yeah.
And yet they only prosecuted the operator, Henry Vinson, and 3 of his lieutenants, as it were. Mm-hmm. They never went after any of the Johns or the clients. This operation, which was, again, quite large, claimed to have clients that ran from the White House to the Capitol Hill to the State House to the churches, within the media.
And that's precisely what Paul describes as the people he was with.
And a lot of the stuff led there, but we couldn't quite nail it in all cases because, again, to accuse someone of high stature, you've got to be very careful.
I understand.
We were able to do it through the mother lode, which provided us credit card receipts and canceled checks, and then lists of the clients. The prosecutors knew all this stuff. There was approximately 20,000 pieces of 20,000 documents that they had. They sealed the entire record when they found out I was accessing it. They required consent agreements from all the lawyers, all the clients, all the relatives of all the clients, all the hookers, including the clients themselves.
Which means you can never gain access.
They sealed them by court order. And we have we've attempted on several occasions to unseal that, and we've been told it will be a cold day in hell before those records ever get unsealed. And it makes me wonder what's in those records.
Yeah.
So I, really quick, Conspiracy of Silence, that's the name of Conspiracy of Silence regarding the Franklin cover-up. I highly recommend you watch that entire documentary. I know in that clip we didn't get into detail regarding Gary Caradori's death. I already mentioned it. Also, the Franklin cover-up by John DeCamp. I highly recommend that you all watch that documentary as well. If you can't read that book, I actually have a copy of the Franklin cover-up. Look into this stuff. One thing I can tell you about my time in politics, that sexually depraved people, and I do not have any firsthand knowledge regarding pedophiles per se, but sexually depraved people, where they're adulterers, swingers, I do have firsthand knowledge of that these people are intentionally recruited into politics so they can be blackmailed, used, and controlled. I saw it happen firsthand with some of these people who I thought were Christians and then find out later they're swingers, and they're completely used. And this is what we have to be aware of these things. But nevertheless, what was very telling also in that piece regarding the Franklin cover up is how the FBI was involved and covered it up. And so doesn't this sound just like the Epstein case where, it's these elected officials, these police, the police, they're all involved involved in helping to cover up these crimes. And then when you have courageous police officers, when you have courageous legislators who do want to stand up and do the right thing, they're threatened, they're harassed, they're intimidated. And then investigators like Gary Corridori, they're killed. So nevertheless, moving on, there's another case, that's pointing to this international sex trafficking ring. And this one is really interesting. This one is based out of Brazil, John of God. Now, he went to prison, so it's not like he got away with it. But it's really interesting that John of God, clip 12, that John of God of Brazil, he was touted by Oprah Winfrey, clip 13. He was touted by Oprah Winfrey as a healer. John of God would claim that spirits would inhabit his body to conduct or engage in these, to facilitate these healings. Now, not to get into the whole spiritual element of that, clip 14. So what was interesting about John of God of Brazil was there's multiple images of him and Marina Abramovich. Now, Marina Abramovich, the reason why it's relevant to us talking about these child sex abuse rings is her name became prominent regarding Pizzagate. Now, there's been so many attempts to discredit Pizzagate. I don't even have time to get into Pizzagate, but that one that case, it mirrors what we're talking about with the Franklin cover-up. The same type of situation when there's an elite pedophile ring. But then as time progresses, this is where we cross into the realm of the satanic with Marina Abramovich, clip 15. Well, Marina Abramovich is a witch. And there are so many pictures of her involved in these bizarre cannibalistic style parties. There's images, one that I chose not to share with you all because it's very graphic, but it was a guy who was the head of the fashion house, Givenchy, actually nursing on her breast, but it was not sexual at all. He was praising her as like a mother. It was really bizarre because she's seen as this healer, this spiritual leader. So as you can see this picture of her with Jay-Z, she's seen as this healer. She's seen as this leader. She's seen as this phenomenal woman. And she, as you can see from the photos, is very connected with John of God. And what John of God would do is he would kidnap women, rape them, and then sell the children he made with these women to child traffickers. This is what he did. But he's not like he got away with it. He's sitting in prison. But this is when we cross over to the satanic part. He was rumored to have healed Bill Clinton, Naomi Campbell, and Oprah touted him as a healer. And when she went to see him conduct his healing, which she claimed spirits inhabit him to do, she was talking about how so much peace happened and how she was changed. Here's Jay-Z with Marina Abramovich. And there's pictures of Oprah with John of God. Now, this is where it gets into the darkness regarding Marina Abramovich. With the Pizzagate case, Marina Abramovich is listed talking about to the Podesta brothers, reached out to Tony Podesta, asking his brother John will be there and they were going to do spirit cooking. Now, I wish I had a lot more time to get into detail of this because this gets into the occult element as we see through time that these child trafficking rings also involve satanic ritual abuse. You can look at Ted Gunderson. I didn't have time to clip that in. He was a former FBI chief out of LA. He talks in detail about these rings where it weren't just pedophile rings, but they involve satanic ritual abuse because when these people, they believe that human sacrifice is an important element of them being able to connect with the various spirits they want to connect with. But if you go back to the previous clip, now, if you look at what spirit cooking is, Aleister Crowley, who was a 19th century Satanist. This dude he called himself the Great Beast 666. There were countries who would ban him. This man promoted everything from pedophilia to bestiality and everything in between. And so she is mimicking his spell, spirit cooking, where it involved child sacrifice, it involved child blood, other elements like semen and breast milk, and he would conduct a spell with this. Now, these people claim, oh, this is just art. Again, I don't care if you're a Christian or not. Why would you replicate this spell where she has the effigy of a child with throwing blood on it, spirit cooking, and all of this stuff? And there's an email, thanks to WikiLeaks, that she's connected with the Podestas and the Clintons. And we're all supposed to just forget about it. Who cares if the people who are controlling levers of our society are connected with child sex traffickers, pedophiles, and Satanists? Who cares, right? We just need to move on, forget about it. No, this is it's a long-standing problem in our country, and Epstein is just one layer. We know that he wasn't all of it, but it's one layer of a huge onion that needs to be peeled back and exposed, because if we tolerate child sex abuse in our society, we are reprobating, inviting God's judgment. But again, if we have people that's in powerful and influential positions of our society who enjoy sexually abusing children, they're gonna be first in line to strip us of our liberty. Nevertheless, moving on to Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein, as you know, starting in 2006 was where they had the first grand jury investigation regarding rape allegations against Epstein and operating a teenage prostitution ring. Despite evidence against Epstein, he entered a plea deal. Now, there were victims who were accusing him, and it was significant evidence. He entered a plea deal where he got 18 months in prison. Not prison, jail. There is a difference. So this man operated a teenage prostitution ring, was raping and sexually abusing teenage girls, and he got 18 months in prison and was allowed work release. He was allowed work release. Then, where people really got concerned, before I get to that comment, but Brad Edwards, who was the attorney for several of the victims, he stated, quote, they, quote, took the case to the grand jury. He's talking about the prosecutors. They took the case to the grand jury with an agenda to return minimal, if any, criminal charges against Epstein. He continued in another quote. A fraction of the evidence was presented in a misleading way, and the office portrayed the victims as criminals, he said. And then he continued. It is so sad the number of victims Epstein was able to abuse because the state carried water for him when they had a chance to put him away. Now, this sounds just like the Franklin cover-up, where the victims come forward, but then the investigators, the police, the prosecutors, the FBI treat the victims like they're the criminals and help the sex abuser get away. You think we're going to have justice in America with this kind of filth going on? Nevertheless, Alex Acosta, who is the U.S. District Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, he went on to become the labor secretary under President Trump's first term. He signed off on the non-prosecution deal with Epstein. Now, Alex Acosta, he claims that he was told to back off of Epstein because he was a, quote, intelligence asset, end quote. Now, this is what it was reported Alex Acosta said. And when Alex Acosta was approached about whether or not he was told to back off of Epstein because he was an intelligence asset, he refused to answer the question. He won't even respond. Therefore, confirming that he said it. Because otherwise, he would have said, no, I never said that. He won't even respond. Holy Ghost, help me. So what kind of country do we have where pedophiles are being used as intelligence assets? Think about that. So the Jeffrey Epstein case, no, we will not move on. I will not move on. When we have a pedophile being used as an intelligence asset, I'm sorry, but the bodies of our children is not a tool to our liberty. The bodies of our children are not tools in political pragmatism. If you think that, you are wicked, period. And I don't regret saying that. This is absolutely unbelievable. Our children. Clip 19. Now, Jeffrey Epstein has connections to Michigan. Jeffrey Epstein, in the summer, when Jeffrey, I don't know when exactly, but Jeffrey Epstein attended a summer camp at Interlochen in northern Michigan. Now, I don't know if it was around the same time. I suspect it was around the same time Sheldon was conducting his abuse. There's no evidence that Epstein, and Sheldon were connected, but I do find it very interesting. I wish I had the clip up, but Jeffrey Epstein does resemble one of the sketches of the Oakland County child killer. I'm not saying Jeffrey Epstein was the Oakland County child killer. Please do not think I'm saying that, but I'm just saying it's very interesting that because he has a very prominent, he had a very prominent chin, and that person looked like him. But anyways, just saying. But nevertheless, Jeffrey Epstein went to a summer camp because he's a classically trained pianist in Interlaken. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell went on to have a cabin in northern Michigan in Interlaken, and they interacted with the school. He had some kind of scholarship. Now, this is recent article that was put out by a Traverse City newspaper, The Ticker, regarding an ongoing investigation into Interlaken regarding allegations of sex abuse. Interlaken is a very prominent boarding school. So again, until these pedophiles are being held accountable, this stuff is going to continue, which means the children are going to continue to be abused. Nevertheless, as we know, in 2018, Jeffrey Epstein was charged with federal crimes of sex trafficking. And we all know that Jeffrey Epstein, the who's who of business and entertainment and politics, were associated with Jeffrey Epstein. So you can see from this headline here that Florida prosecutors knew Epstein raped teenage girls 2 years before cutting the deal. So there's no reason for a prosecutor to cut a deal with the perpetrator unless they're going to flip and give them a bigger fish. That's the only time that it's rational. Let's say he was the underling in the ring and say, okay, well, if you give us the bigger guy, we'll give you a smaller sentence. But why give him the deal? But again, which Alex Acosta has not denied, even though asked repeatedly, the claim that he stated that Jeffrey Epstein was an intelligence asset, which gets to our next point, clip 20. What gives credibility to the claim by Alex Acosta, which he refuses to deny, which means he said it, was an article from the Times of Israel. Now, this article from the Times of Israel, it states that the former Prime Minister Ehud Barak met with Jeffrey Epstein 30 times. And in 2016, he met with him monthly. And one meeting that Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, one meeting was at the office of Henry Kissinger. I don't even need to get into what an evil man Henry Kissinger is. All right, I'm not even going to waste your time with that. Now, one of the reasons why this is so relevant is because it gives credibility to the claim that he was an intelligence asset. Now, some believe that he was Mossad, an Israeli intelligence asset. I disagree. I think that Jeffrey Epstein was an asset for the CIA, Mossad, MI6, and whomever else. Because when you look at the globalist cult, they have compartmentalized corrupt actors in every government around the world. And you have some people, unfortunately, who want to come to this conclusion that there's this massive Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. Jewish people make up less than 1% of the world's population. So in order for this massive conspiracy to take over the world to happen, would mean that they would need, if it was true, which is not, but they would need non-Jewish people to participate, which then cease to make it a Jewish conspiracy because it's never been. It's a globalist conspiracy. And the globalist cult have a role for each country. They treat the relationship between the globalist cult and each country is like a vassal state. And each country has a specific role. And they're definitely compartmentalized corrupt actors in the Israeli government. So it's really important for people to have accurate situational awareness. And I get the whole thing with AIPAC and this. They should be registered as a foreign lobby. But the globalist cult just has a unique role for the Israeli government, just like they have a unique role for the American government, China, Brazil, UK, France, and the list goes on. Because when you look at the World Economic Forum and their young global leaders, they're all over the world because they wedge within the world's government. So, we just need to be honest about what's going on. And yes, the people who want to falsely claim people are anti-Semitic for calling out this type of corruption involving the Israeli government, you're just as horrible as the people that are falsely claiming it's a Jewish conspiracy. Because both parties do not want people to arrive at the truth, which is that around the world, we have this subversive entity that has wedged itself into governments around the world. And one of their weapons of war are using criminal actors like Epstein to gather intel. Another person that I haven't had time to get into is the Playboy. I don't know why his name is escaping me right now, but the guy, Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner had a magazine where he had a nude Brooke Shields on the cover, and she was like 11. How's that not pedophilia? So when you start looking at a lot of these people, this is nothing new where they run these honeypots. Back to the point of the former Israeli prime minister meeting with Jeffrey Epstein over 30 times. Now, this was after the case in South Florida in 2008. So this guy couldn't claim like, well, I didn't know he was terrible. Yes, you did. You're the prime minister. Now, I know even when I was chairwoman, I did not sit down and have a meeting with anybody without doing a full background on who they were. And I was just a state chairwoman. You mean to tell me the former Israeli prime minister didn't know who Jeffrey Epstein was? And then you met with him at Henry Kissinger's office? When Henry Kissinger has a record of seeing nothing wrong with killing people to advancing global interests and in cahoots with the Rockefellers? And it goes on in this article. In the Times of Israel, they report that Jeffrey Epstein also had dozens of meetings with Ariana de Rothschild, the chief executive of the Rothschild family, of the Rothschild group, excuse me. So Jeffrey Epstein is meeting with the Rothschilds. Now, I don't even get into that family about how evil they are, just like the Rockefellers. The reality is that those who control the levers of our society are involved in some of the most depraved and despicable acts one could even conjure up in their minds. And unfortunately, many people want to remain in denial about what is going on, even though the evidence is all out there for you. There's no reason for such prominent people like a representative for the Rothschild family, like the former prime minister of Israel, to sit and meet with the man who was convicted of sexually abusing young girls and young women. There's no reason. Why would you involve yourself with somebody like that? And this was while he was running his sex trafficking ring. And you mean to tell me that they didn't know what he was up to? But to close this episode, this was a really important episode for me because there are many people who feel that those of us complaining about Jeffrey Epstein are just, you need to move on, you need to let it go. And it's just like, no, because there has been a documented history. And that's why I started with the Oakland County child killer case in North Fox Island. There has been a documented history of these elite pedophile rings and the perpetrators simply getting away with it. And now it went from a point of the perpetrator getting simply away with it to now sexually abusing people and sexually abusing children has become a tool in warfare. When we as a society would tolerate the sex abuse of children, what won't we tolerate? We have totally lost our way. So I thank you for tuning into this episode of the Karamo Report. It's very different, but it was important for me to go into great detail why this is such an issue. And we, as Americans, have got to start holding our elected officials accountable. And when they want to deflect back onto, our House leadership said this, Senate leadership said this, the House attorney said this. If you're an elected official, you represent me. Not House leadership, not House and Senate attorneys. You, the representative, represent your constituents. And we, the people, cannot continue to put up with these sexual degenerates being in power and those who protect sexual degenerates being in power. Not only does it lead to more abusive children, but we are inviting God's wrath. So thank you for tuning into the Karamo Report. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe this episode. God bless, and I'll see you next week.